Okay, Chapter 8D, Concept 3, which is factoring trinomials again. But now we're going to introduce a kind of a method here, a system of doing things called the X method. And what this is doing, this is going to help us to solve every one of these trinomials. Some are easier than others, so some of them you may be able to see the factors sooner, which makes it easy, but this system allows us to do really hard ones with relatively easy if we just follow some basic guidelines. The first thing you need to realize is we're always going to look to pull out the greatest common factor. So we're always going to use that GCF first if we can. And then we're going to kind of follow the system here. So if I give you this trinomial, 6x squared plus 42x plus 60, okay, that's pretty tough to look at, okay? But we can make it easier if we see if there's a GCF, and there is, and that GCF is 6. So if I divide this whole trinomial by 6, each part, remember, we've been doing that, okay, I end up with this smaller trinomial, which is way simpler, okay? Once again, you may need to reference page 3, okay, to see an example and a little explanation for how we're going to do this method. So there, it's in writing. That may help some of you guys out, along with me trying to explain it. But if you pay attention to what it says there, we're going to put in our factors, and they need to add up to this middle term. So we put that 7 there. If it was a -7, we'd have a -7. And then we're actually going to take whatever this coefficient is here in front of the squared term, times this, and put it where it's going to multiply together, because we're trying to uncombine this middle term so then we can factor it easy. So 1 times 10 is 10. So that might be a little bit confusing. If you didn't quite pick up on that, we got 2 more examples, so I'll try to re-explain that every time. But I want things to add up to this middle term, so I put it here right next to the plus, and then I take the leading coefficient and this constant and multiply them together to get this number here. Well, I want those middle terms to multiply together. Remember, we're trying to uncombine this so that we can use factor by grouping to get our solution. All right, so we're going to put what our factors can be here. But so to find that, we are going to basically start doing the factors of 10. So things that multiply to 10. I want you guys to always start, okay, at the very beginning. So both ends. So 1 times 10. But remember, we also need these 2 numbers that we come up with, these 2 factors of 10. When we combine them, okay, to be 7. So 1 plus 10 is not going to be 7, so that doesn't work. Okay, 2 times 5. Yes, so those are my parts here. So that's my uncombined term here. So whenever I rewrite this part, okay, this becomes x squared plus 2x plus 5x plus 10. So what I just did there was I found out what will uncombine this 7 here. Okay, that will help me factor. Once I've uncombined, once I got this like stretched out to this polynomial, I can now just apply my factor by grouping, which we did in the last concept. So one last thing is make sure you just mentally check to make sure these combine to be the middle term. 2 plus 5 does make 7. Sometimes we just write down the wrong thing. Sometimes we get carried away so we don't see it. So make sure you always check. All right, GCF here. GCF the second part. Oops. Put my parenthesis too quickly there. Let me rewrite. Okay, if you notice, I have my twins again. I have my loners, so my twins are going to come out in front. Okay, and I copied that down wrong. I'm sorry. All right, so my twins are going to come out in front. And then my 2 loners I'm going to put together and the second part, so they're no longer loners. Okay, and this just so happens to be my factors. Once I get to that point, okay. So that's why we want to do this. This factors out pretty nicely. We'd spend quite a bit of time trying to figure this out a different way. Not that the easier ones you couldn't, but for the harder ones when they got some of the numbers. Last thing to point out is notice the 6 out in front. Remember, I pulled out the GCF originally as a 6, and that went back to that it has to be in front still. If we would multiply these, distribute this 6 back through, and then FOIL, we would end back up with this, and we will check that out in class. Okay. All right, let me go to my next one. It's going to get kind of cramped here, so I'm going to try to do my best to change colors. All right, once again, I'll give you the this trinomial. We look to see if it's got a GCF. It does not, so that doesn't help us. So now we're just dealing with that trinomial. Remember, I want things to add up, these two middle terms, to add up to 9. Okay. And then I take my leading coefficients, okay, and my constant and multiply them together. That's 5 times -2, which is -10. Okay, very important we get those things worked out. So maybe I'll draw like that. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to go after my factors here. Remember, we're trying to split this up, uncombine it, so that we can then use factor by grouping, which is relatively easy, hopefully by now, for us to factor. All right, so multiples of 10, 1 and 10. Okay, but one of them has got to be negative. To make -10 negative, one of these two terms got to be negative. So we got to make sure we apply that to our concept. And if we see, we get a +9 if the -1's out in front. So -1 times 10 gives me 10. And 10 minus 1 gives me 9. So I've already found my factors, or my parts, right off the bat here. Relatively easy. So you always got to keep that in mind if you got that negative there, that whenever you combine them by adding, okay, one of them's got to be negative. If it's positive, then we can actually have negative and positive. It's going to depend on this number. We'll get into that one in a second. All right, let's uncombine here and see what happens. So 5n squared minus 1n plus 10n minus 2. Okay. I am going to group, so I'll factor by grouping. And I get an n pulled out here. So I get 5n minus 1. Okay, and then I'm going to pull out a positive 2 and get 5n minus 1. Okay, so I've got down to my parts. If you've noticed, okay, I got my twins and I got my loner, so I'll put my twins out in front. When they combine, they're no longer twins. And then I'm going to put my loners together. And those are my factors. So I'm just going to copy that down. Down here, my answer section. Okay. Now this one doesn't have anything out in front like the previous one did because I didn't pull anything out to begin with. So you got to kind of make sure you're going through this process one thing at a time. Don't try to do too much together. Okay, last one here. Giving this trinomial -5 r squared plus 19r plus 4. Okay, look and see if there's GCF. Now you might not think there is one, but if you remember back to our guidelines, we have a negative. We have to pull out a negative always. So we actually pull out a -1, so there is a GCF. That just makes this part inside easier when we do that. That's why we apply that rule. Okay. Same process. Okay, I want these things to add up to -19. And I need it to multiply. Oops, not that one. I need to multiply up to negative 20. Okay. So I'm going to start by listing factors of negative 20. Remember, this is negative, so one of them is going to have to be negative. So 1 times 20. And if I add those, I would get negative 19 if that 20 is a negative. Okay, so 1 times negative 20 gives me 20, and then negative 20 plus 1 gives me negative 19. So once again, I found out my part's pretty easy. A quick hint, okay, the bigger this number is, the farther away these factors are from each other. If it's a small number like 2, 3, then these factors have to be closer together. That's kind of a hint to maybe pick which one to do, but I always want you starting off with those. Okay, let's put our thing back together here. So we are going to go 5r squared plus 1r minus 20r minus 4. So I just broke up that middle term, and if you do a quick check, 1r minus 20r does combine back to be negative 19r. All right. Factor by grouping. Okay. Once again, we should be getting good at that, hopefully. Nothing pulls out. Oh, an r pulls out. So we got r, and we got 5r plus 1. And then now the second one, we see a negative, so we know we're going to put on a negative. And it looks like 4 will go into both of those. And we're pulling out the GCFs here. So it becomes 5r plus 1. Another thing that helps, and I mentioned this in class the other day, you know these are going to be twins inside the parentheses, so kind of use that to help you find the GCF sometimes. Okay, let's pull our twins out. So they're no longer twins. And then pull the loners out because we don't want them to be alone anymore. And we have our factors. Okay. And that's how you factor using what I'm calling the X method. Okay. There are other methods or other ways we can kind of go about this with simpler trinomials, and I can show you. And maybe you've experienced that before. But this is a way that you always will be able to figure out the factors, even for these hard ones, because really these are all pretty hard when we add these things in front of the squared terms. Okay, so just keep that in mind that this is just one method among a few others that'll help you out. So a little bit longer video today, but a lot of information there. This is probably one of the most important parts, is the most important part of this chapter, and one of the most important parts about learning math going forward is being able to factor these things. So once you get good at this, you're well on your way to being very successful in a lot of different areas of math. So if you got any questions, please bring them up in class. I do expect quite a few questions on this. This is a very involved concept. There's parts that may be a little bit confusing to a few of you. Don't be afraid to ask. Just remember, if you got a question, there's probably someone else in the class that has the same question, so you're actually helping out somebody else whenever you ask. So please do that. Okay, good luck. If you do feel like you want to try a few of the practice quiz questions, please do that, and I can help you out with those. Okay, maybe not try all of them, but try 2, 3, just to see where you're at. Maybe you're further along than what you think, or maybe you think you got it and you figure out, well, maybe I don't quite have it. So maybe try those out. I'll check them and let you know if you're on the right path or not. All right, good luck. Good luck.